You're listening to Free Mama Radio, where we believe you can have both a successful business and show up as the mom you want to be. I'm your host, Lauren Golden, a mom who built a full-time income working part-time hours. Now, I help other moms like you learn how to work from home on your own terms, take control of your schedule, and make more money so you can live a totally awesome, guilt-free life. I am on a mission to make sure that no mother has to choose between family and financial stability. So if you've been wondering, can I really have it all? This podcast will give you the answers.
Hey mamas, welcome to another episode of Free Mama Radio. I'm so excited. I've got Sara Dean here today, and it's kind of like a mini reunion because I have not gotten to interview her since I was on her podcast. Is that like a year and a half ago?
It was a while ago. I know. The band is back together.
The band is back together. She is the host of the Shameless Mom Academy Podcast, a top-rated podcast with almost, but potentially by the time this publishes, 3 million downloads. Insane, like group clap. Everybody give her a round of applause. Sara's biggest passion is helping women own their space. I love that. After enduring her own identity crisis following the birth of her son, Sara took her background in psychology, health, wellness, and rebuilt her identity one step at a time. Sara motivates and inspires women to stop shrinking and start shining. I love your bio. She is on a mission to inspire women and moms in particular to live bigger, bolder, braver every damn day. Sara, welcome to Free Mama Radio. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
And I did not read this part of your bio, but at the end you mentioned that you, your 7-year-old son, and that you build Legos together, and that you pretend you understand Pokemon. And I laughed out loud because I'm like, I have a 6-year-old son, and just solidarity. And what's so funny is like Pokemon was a thing when I was a kid. Like I remember it, and I didn't understand it then, and I still don't understand it.
Same, 100%. Also, Minecraft. Have you guys started Minecraft in your household?
No, I am on the resistance train.
I was too pre-COVID, and then COVID hit, and I was like, maybe just a little bit of Minecraft. Oh my God, it's taken over the world. It's awful. It's worse than Pokemon. Not because it's bad for him, but because I don't understand it, nor do I want to learn it.
Yeah, well, and that's okay because boundaries, right? All right, shameless mom, tell us. Let's start off here. What does it mean to be a shameless mom? What do you do, Sara? What does shameless mean to you?
For me, what it means to be a shameless mom, it's funny, it changes on a day-to-day basis. And the most hilarious thing about this title is that when I ask moms on my show, how are you currently showing up as a shameless mom? They're completely stumped. They're like, well, what angle do you want me to take with this? And in my opinion, part of the being shameless part is that you get to pick whatever angle you want. So,
by definition.
Right. So sometimes for me, currently being a shameless mom is going on 3 walks a day to escape my family in the middle of quarantine. Sometimes being a shameless mom is watching Real Housewives. Sometimes being a shameless mom is taking my kids to a Black Lives Matter march. So it changes dramatically from day to day. And sometimes it serves me, and sometimes it serves other people, and sometimes it's using my voice, and sometimes it's just escaping from everything.
I love that. And as you were talking, what kind of feels really good for me when you're talking is part of my mission and part of my pitch and all of that is to help moms live a guilt-free life. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's kind of in the same conversation of like, do what you want to do what you need to do and do it unapologetically, right? Like you don't need to feel badly all the time about your choices. I love that.
Absolutely.
So talk to me about this identity crisis that you had.
Yeah. So I have been known historically to be a type A, perfectionistic, control freak kind of person.
Don't know anything about that.
I know that's not relatable to any other moms. So I know like I just defined everyone who's listening probably. And so when I got pregnant, we had gone through a long infertility journey. We finally got pregnant. We had a baby, and I had really organized, especially because we went through infertility. I had all this extra time to like really get everything in order and make sure that like I was ready. And I had organized my business at the time. I owned a gym, and I had built that to run without me so that I could stay at home with this baby. And I really felt like I had like spent my whole life building up to this moment that I could create this magical life for myself as a mom. And then this child was born, and it was nothing like I thought it was going to be. And that was completely overwhelming for me. And I spent that entire first year really, really fixated on this idea about when are things going to go back, quote unquote, back to normal? And we actually did this really great parent support group from the time my son was 2 to 5 months old. And every week I would show up and I would say, like, I'm just waiting for things to go back to normal. I'm sure they're going to get better soon. And what I realized after a full year was like, you don't go back to normal. And when I realized that, and it took me a year to get there, and then I was like, holy cow, if we're not going back to normal, then where am I going and who am I now? And that felt very overwhelming and really scary because I knew that I couldn't go back to who I had been. I knew that I was now a new person. And all of a sudden, like nothing made sense once I realized that, because everything was like, now I got to choose. And the last thing I had space for was the decision-making process around like, who do I really want to be? So it took me like 2 more years. And by the time my son was about 3, I started to have a much stronger sense of, okay, here's this really major life event that happened that I can't control or predict anything anymore the way I thought I would be able to. And what does that mean about me? And what does that mean about where I want to go? And it was through that critical thinking period and phase that I started to recognize, like, I had built a business that was no longer in alignment with my core values, and I wanted to have a voice in a new way, and I wanted to have impact in a different way, and I wanted it to be wrapped around motherhood. And I did not want to be a stay-at-home mom. I actually wanted my kid in full-time care, like as soon as possible. And all the things that I had previously thought just shifted, and it took a long time for that shift to happen. And then once it happened, it was fairly dramatic in terms of like the clarity and the conviction that came with it. And then the ball started rolling in the right direction.
That is so good. There's so many things I want to poke there. I love that you said, like, now you got to choose who you are and who you are going to become. And there's a lot that I think our listeners can relate to with that. And I always say, you know, when a lot of free mamas come to me, they come into my world, they look at this exact idea of like, you can choose who you work with. You literally get to decide. And a lot of us, that feels very overwhelming. And where I try to take people is like, no, I want you to be empowered by this. This is good news. Like, it's your life and you get to be this new person and decide it. And so I think we're super in alignment there. So what did you do with your gym? That you said your business was a gym?
Yeah. I started the podcast, and the gym was just it wasn't doing its own thing. I was running it, but I was not physically on location very often at all. So I had my trainers running it. I was running it from behind the scenes from home, and I decided to start the podcast. And that was kind of my passion project. And it was an experiment to see, like, okay, if I want to talk about motherhood and I want to tell stories, I'm going to start this podcast called the Shameless Mom Academy. And it's just going to be this fun project. And I'm going to see how that goes. And what ended up happening within about 6 months, I was like, okay, like, this is something. I want to do something with this. My voice in this space feels way more in alignment with who I am now than my voice in the fitness space. And so I started looking into what it would take to sell my gym, or if I even had something that I could sell. And I started going down that road and learned pretty quickly that I had something that I could sell. And so I started that process. And when I first started, I was very, very hesitant and very nervous and scared. And that would have been my baby before I had my son. Like, that gym, I had just built it from the ground up and put everything I had into it. And it was a huge part of my identity. And when I decided to just even look into selling it, I remember talking to my broker and saying, like, I'm curious about this, but I don't want anything to move too fast. And within 3 weeks, the gym was listed. And I was like pooping my pants. I was like, it can't sell because I'm not ready. Well, then it took 18 months. And by the time it was done, I was like, peace out. It was a really long process. And that process gave me so much clarity that was the right direction for me to be heading. So I ended up selling it and being able to go full-time into the podcast and building a full business around the Shameless Mom Academy.
And so tell us about that. What do you do? And how did it kind of come to you? You know, you do coaching, obviously you've got your event, I know, every year, and all of these different components. Was it a really organic process, or early, like, did you know that a business was going to be behind this podcast?
So I didn't at first, and I was really conscientious. So one of the things that had happened at the gym is I had kind of worked myself out of my zone of genius. And so the things I was doing at the gym, I was sitting at home behind spreadsheets, like looking at profit and loss statements and like looking at trainer schedules and like doing all these things that were that kept the business profitable and kept it running and allowed it to grow, but they were not the fun things. The fun things and the places where I really shined were like being in it and teaching boot camp and being there at 6 a.m., which I didn't want to be doing that anymore, but I knew that that's when I was at my best, was when I was in there with the people face to face, bringing the energy, and like that lit them up. It lit me up. And so I realized that I had worked myself basically into a CFO position with my gym. And that was not my strengths or my gifts, and it was not fun anymore. And so with the podcast, when I decided I wanted to monetize, I was really conscientious around, if I'm going to build a business around this, it has to be in a way that allows me to stay in my strengths and that allows me to maintain my top value of time freedom, which is like always my biggest value of being an entrepreneur.
We share this in common.
It's like such a big deal to me. So when I looked at monetization, it's funny, like my first instinct with monetization on the podcast was, I could start doing some one-on-one like wellness coaching that would incorporate fitness, nutrition, and mindset, because that's what I'd been doing at the gym. So I was like, well, I could do that with the people who listen to the show. And then I realized, but you're going to then build the same business that you ended up being completely overwhelmed with early on at the gym, when I only did one-on-one personal training. And I was doing personal training from like 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day. So I was like, well, I can't build that business. And so I was really conscientious in building the business around the podcast, that I wanted to make sure I could do things that kept me in my strengths and that also really allowed me to keep time freedom. And so that started out being running little programs and just testing them. And so I started out doing like 6-week programs that were mindset reset kinds of programs. And so the first one I did was called Momentum Mamas, and it was just building momentum in your life through practicing being courageous and confident, practicing new tiny habits, setting new boundaries, having like anything that could help you live bigger, bolder, braver every damn day kinds of things. And so I did a few little groups of that program and just felt them out, and they felt really good. And I really enjoyed that. And so I ended up then deciding, okay, this could eventually at some point be like a full membership program that doesn't just last for 6 weeks. And so now that is a full membership program, and it's a 12-month program. And I've had that for 2 years now. So that kind of started with like, let's just test a couple things that prioritize you staying in your strengths and keeping time freedom and not doing just one-on-one work. So I do some one-on-one work, but that's definitely not it's like very exclusive business coaching kind of stuff. It's not at all like health, wellness, and mindset stuff like I originally thought it might be. So yeah, it started there. And now I have 6 streams of income around the show, and it's a ton of fun, and it's been amazing. That doesn't mean it's not hard or scary, but it's fun too.
We're going to tap into the scary here in just a second. But before we go there, I love that you used the phrase zone of genius. I feel very aware of my zone of genius as well. I think some of our listeners, though, who are listening, who are like, how was she so intentional about knowing her strengths and her values and building a business? And obviously you had this past business, but for someone who's just getting started, maybe they're new in the Free Mama community and they're just starting their virtual service business. What advice do you have to those people? How do they tap into, you've got this wellness and mindset, like this is kind of your jam. How do they tap into their strengths or their values? Like, what does that process look like for someone who's never actually thought about it before?
Such a good question. Okay. So the first thing you do is you get the book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, because all of his work, the zone of genius concept is his concept. So from there, you'll learn a ton in that. But from there, you will be able to start to understand what is zone of competence. So zone of incompetence, which is like just the stuff you suck at. So I always laugh that for me, it's like scanners and printers and technology. For me, it's
volleyball. I know that's really volleyball and cooking. Volleyball and cooking.
So there's all sorts of things that we're really bad at. And we can look at them and we can be like, oh my gosh, like almost anyone I know is better at this than me. And then we have zone of competence. And zone of competence is like so many things in motherhood, like making dinner. You're like, yeah, I can do it. I hate it. I'm not very good at it, but I guess I'll do it every single day. And there's plenty of things that we do like that personally and professionally. Where many of us get stuck professionally is in zone of excellence. And so zone of excellence is the stuff that you're really good at. And not many people can do it better than you, but it does not light you up. And so I always jokingly, lovingly use an example of a CPA. So a CPA or an accountant in my mind, because it would not be fun for me, in my mind, people who are in that field, they do it really, really well. Like not many people could be a CPA better than a CPA. But do you ever meet CPAs who are like, oh my gosh, it's tax season. This is going to be awesome this year. Like every time I talk to a CPA, they're like, yeah, a lot of work going on. Like you can just tell like their work sucks the life out of them, but like not many people can do it better than them. So they're really good at what they do. They're super educated. They have a ton of experience. And also like they're always dying for their next vacation because they're not lit up by their work. Now I'm sure there's exceptions. So if you're a CPA and I've just totally offended you, my apologies. The zone of genius is when you're doing your work and it's giving you energy the whole time and you're so lit up. And so what I realized for me with the podcast is that I would be sitting in my office recording and I would give myself goosebumps, which sounds really egotistical, but I was like, I know I'm in my zone of genius right now. Like I'm giving myself goosebumps talking to myself, but knowing that other people are going to hear this. And that was really clear to me. So for me, zone of genius is there's a very visceral response. So when I'm leading coaching calls every Monday night with my Momentum Mamas group, or I have a business and leadership mastermind called Tenacious Mamas. And when I'm leading coaching calls with those groups now, and I'm teaching and I'm really excited about something, I have that visceral response. Like I start talking faster, my voice goes up. I either start sweating or I get goosebumps. I lean in. Oh my gosh. I have a backache from like,
I get big. Oh, I love it.
I'm like leaning in further and further. I will tear up a lot, which sometimes people will know, sometimes they won't. Like there is a visceral response when I'm in my zone of genius. And so learning to listen to that and recognize, I think, especially for women, all the places where we're in our zone of competence or zone of excellence and we're settling. And I think that's where we tend to get stuck because other people are like, oh, but you're so good at that thing. You should just keep going. So you do that because that's what you've been told to do. And that's what it seems like everyone does. But then you never get the opportunity to go all the way into zone of genius and do the things that light you up. And by the way, zone of genius is not stuff you were born good at or have a lot of practice doing. It's often the really scary stuff. So for me, like getting on stages can be terrifying. It's also totally my zone of genius. Podcasting was the same thing initially. It was super scary, but also was the thing that gave me goosebumps when I was doing it.
I love that. And so that's what I want to talk about next is that scary thing. So you gave a couple examples. Why did you decide to do a live event if it was scary? And what do you do to push through it? Other than having the awareness, right? Like this is my strengths. These are my values. This is my people. This is my business. This is my zone of genius. Like what are some tactical things that you do to push through to do something that's scary?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And that live event, like, scared me so. I was so nervous. And from the moment I committed to it, I remember thinking, I think I committed to it in January and it was at the end of April. And I remember thinking, I'm not sleeping for 4 months now because how am I going to sleep? I'm so scared of this thing. And I've put it out there into the world and now I have to do it and I'm terrified. And I did not sleep for a solid few weeks. And I had to like do so much self-coaching to recognize like, you're not going to serve anyone if you don't sleep for 4 months. So for me, I knew it was the next right step. I knew it was something I needed to test because I knew that if it worked well, it could be so magical. And so I had a strong enough sense of my community that I knew if I brought together some members in my community that they were going to just love being together and they were already my super fans. So again, that sounds egotistical, but any of you running a business, like you have super fans and you have people who will show up for whatever you do. And that might just be a really small, tight-knit group of people, but those people are going to show up and they're going to love you and they're going to respect you, even if you totally flop. So I started out knowing that. And then I decided to invite a whole bunch of people I didn't know, and that made it way scarier. But I knew that that's what I needed to do if I wanted to make it a full-fledged event that I could get new members out of and that made sense to do from a financial perspective. So what I did leading into that as I was feeling so full of fear is I had to constantly remind myself all the things I had done that had prepared me to do this thing. And this is where I think we don't give ourselves credit. And we don't collect the right data. So I had to look back at the data and be like, oh, but remember when you opened that gym when you were, so remember when you opened your own gym to start with, remember when you moved your gym when you were 38 weeks pregnant and spent 3 days laying in flooring the day before you went into labor. And then remember when you were 2 months postpartum and you had to launch a new program because that gym was about to start losing money rapidly. And you had to show up 2 months postpartum with infected breasts and like pull off leading boot camp classes, all these things that I had done. And I was like, okay, like I can go ahead and show up at a fancy hotel and give some speeches, So looking at the hard things I'd already done reminded me and reinforced for me that I could continue to do harder things. and that it was like it was the only way was to test it and see. And to know that even if it wasn't wildly successful, I was going to learn a whole bunch of things. So, and then I made sure that I did it in a way that was like fiscally not too risky. So
And that's smart too. Okay. So you have mentioned the word testing a few times now over the last couple of questions, and I love it. For anybody who doesn't know, I take like insane notes anytime I interview someone because it's just so much fun for me. So Sara, thank you so much. This is amazing. You mentioned the word testing several times, and I love it because the word that keeps showing up for me every time you say it, much like you know your people. I know the free mamas, and I know there's free mamas who are listening right now, and the thing getting in their way is perfectionism. They want it to be right. They want to get it right? That's right. Like, they're so hung up on doing it right the first time that I want you to just sit here and say testing a few more times just to like smack them around a little. Like, right. How did you learn that to build a successful business, you have to test? And what does that mean to you? Like, when you keep saying testing, what does that mean to you? Because I think it's a concept that not everybody maybe intuitively knows. Listen, you don't just like launch a business and like build this funnel or a website and then like announce it and like make $1 million. Like, it's, gosh. You have to, like, we do all this stuff in our heads, and it's like, but then you don't actually, like, you're not buying from yourself. Like, you got to do some other stuff. So tell me what testing means to you. How did you get good at it? And is that a part of everything you do in your business? Do you always launch with some sort of testing phase?
Often, yes. So this is so funny. I love that you use the example around building a website and then thinking that people will just show up, because so often my business coaching clients come to me and they're like, well, I can't do anything until I have my website up. I'm like, no one cares about your website. Like, they're never your website. Nobody's going to look for it. It's not going to be search optimized. Like, no one cares. Start the business, get the website in the next few months. Literally nobody cares. And so like, no one's going to be like, oh, but I need to read your about me page first. Like, there might be a few people that want to know your credentials. You can tell them, or they want to, whatever. Like, if people ask questions, answer them. So for testing, what this looks like for me is data collection that is neutral data collection. So that means that if something flops, it's neutral data that I tried A, B, and C, and the result was D. Was that a result that I want to makes it worth trying again, or that means I need to change some things, or that was amazing, or like, what does that mean? And how can I use that moving forward? Instead of what we typically do is having something go really well or go really poorly, and then deciding that that's a direct reflection of who we are. If I can run a live event and have it completely flop and learn something from that, or learn that like, I don't like running live events, or they're super expensive and not profitable, or people don't want to come across the country to a live event in Seattle. If I can learn any of those things, none of that makes me a less valuable as a person or less worthy as a person. Those are just all data points for me. And so testing for me means looking at things on this really objective, neutral level where my worth is not defined by my success or my failures. My worth is not defined by the money in the bank. And these are big, hard, heavy things that I still work on a lot. This is not like I've mastered this, but I use the idea of testing to make sure that I can continue to try things and push myself to try things in order to collect the data and look at it from a really neutral, objective place in order to then make the next decision. What am I going to do moving forward based on this data? Not based on how I feel worthy or not worthy based on the data, but just based on this data, does it make sense to do it again? So what I saw after that live event was, oh, holy cow, this actually could be twice as big and twice as profitable and have twice the impact. And I could have speakers coming from all over the country. Like, my speakers the first year were like friends who I called in a favor for, because I was like, I don't know, like, would you maybe want to speak at my thing? I know it's maybe kind of a pain. And then I learned that people actually totally want to come speak at your things, and they will fly across the country to do it when flying is allowed. So like, learning all of that, I learned what I could do next. And then there was other things that I totally dropped the ball on or missed in that first year. And those were all really valuable learning experiences as well, where I was like, oh, okay. So based on that, I mean, like, I tried to host happy hour for 50 people in my hotel suite. And I think I almost got like the whole event kicked out of the hotel. It was hilarious.
Good story though.
But like I totally learned. I was like, okay, so next year, maybe spring for the hotel bar, I hosted my first retreat last year. We actually got kicked out of our Airbnb in the middle of the retreat. I could have deemed that it was so stressful. I was so upset about the whole thing, literally like trying to lead a retreat and not cry for like 2 days straight. And I could have deemed that whole thing a huge flop. And at the end of it, the people who were there were like, we can't believe how seamlessly you handled that. Like you literally had us all pack up this entire house. You moved us to a hotel, like nothing skipped a beat. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, oh my God, they hate me. And they're thinking, you just did that like a boss. So looking at it from neutral, regardless of what I think or they think, looking at it from a neutral place of the worst thing that could possibly happen when you're hosting your first retreat is that you get kicked out of your venue with all of the people that you're staying with and you have to move. That thing happened. And what did I learn? Well, I learned that I'm not going to use an Airbnb to host 15 people next time. I'm going to just go right to a hotel. And I also learned that the worst possible thing could happen and that it can make a really great story, that it can make it's a huge lesson in resilience. It's taught me, like, I luckily had my team there with me. I could have never done it without them, or so I tell myself. So the value of leaning on my team and trusting my team while they handled it all, while I was like sitting coaching and they were like calling hotels to move us to. So I learned a ton of great things. That was not a failure. That was a huge lesson and also a great story now.
I love your perspective so much. So I hope everybody else is taking notes as well. You mentioned a little while ago, like you've kind of had to self-coach yourself. And as you talk, I can tell like, and we all are, this work in progress where it's like, we know things, but sometimes we have to like remind ourselves the things we know when our opinions or our feelings or these potential failures start to happen. I know that your morning, it sounds like, might be an important part of your day. You have
totally
a 15-minute morning manifestation kind of thing that you do?
Yes.
So do you want to tell us just a little bit about that?
Yeah. So are you familiar with Hal Elrod's book, The Miracle Morning?
I have not read it, but I'm familiar.
Okay.
I've heard of it. Yes.
Okay. So I read this probably 4 years ago, and I love the book. I love the idea. And it's this hour-long process of a morning routine. And it's like 10 minutes of meditation, 10 minutes of affirmations, 10 minutes of visualization, 10 minutes of movement. I don't remember all the rest, but anyways, this whole thing takes an hour. So I was like, oh, this is brilliant. I'm going to totally do this. Well, I'm a mom. Like to take an hour. Right. Like and the end. So chapter 1, I'm a mom, the end. So I loved the idea. But what I found myself doing was like, I'm going to do 3 minutes of this thing and 1 minute of that thing. And I was like rearranging it all. And then I also like parts of it, just like the visualization. I was like, I don't need to visualize for 10 minutes a day or in the morning. Other people that might really resonate with, but for me, I was like, not so much on the visualization. So what I did is I took 3 things that stuck with me. After like a year and a half, I took the 3 things that I was still consistently doing, but I was doing in a much smaller time frame. And I turned them into my own morning routine that really worked for me. And so I took movement, reading, and writing and turned that into a 15-minute morning routine, which could be shortened to be even less. I mean, you could make it 3 minutes long, but it's really a way to frame your day. And so it starts off with read something that inspires you or lights you up. It can be a paragraph. It can be a chapter. It can be a page. It doesn't have to be like reading a whole big, huge thing. It might be like a paragraph out of Glennon Doyle's book. Something that's just like really fuels you for the day. Then write and journal. And I put journal in quotes because I'm not a journaler. I feel like I would benefit from journaling, but I'm not a journaler. So I make lists. And so making a list of like, here's how I want to feel today. Here's what I'm grateful for. And here's 3 things I need to get done today to consider today a success. That takes a few minutes. It's not like a big, long process. And then movement. And so 3 minutes of moving your body, 5 minutes of moving your body, however long you want it to be. And it can be some stretching. It can be going for a walk. It can be running stairs in your house. It could be doing like burpees. It can be getting on your Peloton, like whatever you want that thing to be. Those, I think, are the key ingredients to getting your head in the right spaces, like having some outside inspiration, creating a list for you that frames your day around how you want to feel, what you're feeling grateful for, and what you want to accomplish or what you're going to accomplish to make your day a win. And then getting in movement, because what we know is that motion processes emotion and that stretching opens your body physically and emotionally, or working hard allows you to process anxiety. So a lot of people like to stretch in the morning and like do yoga and have this more expansive time to move. For me, I wake up every morning with a pit in my stomach. I have had anxiety since I was 8 years old. And the thing that makes that pit go away is moving my body in a fast, high intensity way. So for me, it's moving my body in some sort of typically higher intensity way. And sometimes it's 3 minutes and sometimes it's 30 minutes. So my process is anywhere from 15 minutes to 60 minutes, but someone else, it could be 3 minutes and like 1 minute given to each of those things. But I think the power in that is that you're framing your day and creating boundaries around your day that allow you to start your day off from a position of power and a position of being proactive versus a place of being reactive. And if you are living in a household with children, or like me, a new puppy, and you start off your day in that reactive space, it feels like all you do the whole entire day is react to what other people need. And for me, by 4 o'clock, if I'm reacting all day long, I'm a disaster. And I'm not a nice mommy, and I'm really not a nice wife by that point. Yeah. So for me, having that morning routine and having it be just really simple makes all the difference in the world.
I just learned so much. Honestly, I've never heard anybody talk about the high intensity workout for anxiety. I've heard it associated with like the DISC profile. High Ds need physical releases because they're fueled by anger. And so they need that. I've never heard it associated with anxiety. And then tell me one more time what you said about the stretching.
So stretching just allows you to physically and emotionally expand. So like yogis, really I'm the opposite of a yogi. I tried to be a yogi for a long time, but you definitely feel this openness about you. So I used to do a lot of hot yoga when I worked in a psychiatric hospital, and at the end of my shift, and it was really, really high intense job. At the end of my shift, I'd go do 90 minutes of hot yoga. And it was just this like expansive release of everything from the hospial. So some people really need that. Like I need to pound through emotion.
I probably need both.
So that's the thing. Those of us that need to pound through emotion also need the expansiveness. We have a harder time identifying that should be a priority.
We are very similar, my friend. That is awesome. And you guys can grab that at shamelessmom.com/1515mm. And of course, as always, we'll put the link in the show notes. Okay, I have to fangirl for just a hot second. Did I see, speaking of Glennon Doyle, that she crashed your book club?
Yes.
#jealous, Sarah. How cool was that?
That was ridiculous.
Did you know that it was happening?
She had put up a post on social media a couple weeks prior that said, hey, I have been doing some Zoom bombs of people who are using my book for their book clubs. If you are leading a group and using my book for book club, send us an email to this email address and include these 3 things, like a Zoom link that you're going to be on, the time you're going to be there. And like, there was some other question. So someone tagged me in the post, someone from my membership community tagged me from the post because we were just about to start reading her new book, Untamed. So I was like, oh my gosh, I immediately emailed, like within an hour of the post going up. It was a super fast email. And as soon as I sent it, the third question that they asked, they said, include a question you would want to ask Glennon if she came to your book club. So I sent mine really quickly between phone calls. And as soon as I sent it, I was like, oh, that wasn't a good enough question. They're never going to pick me. I was like so frustrated.
Do you remember the question?
No, but it was like very generic. I don't remember what it was. But anyway, so I was like, oh, I should have been more thoughtful or clever or whatever. So 2 weeks pass and I am at my mom's house, about to get on my Monday call where we're doing this book club with my membership community. And I pop into my inbox really quick to grab a link to something. And I have an email from Glennon's team that says, hey, can you send us your phone number just in case Glennon's able to make any of your calls this month? And I was like, oh my gosh. So I sent my phone number and my assistant's phone number. And I was like, here you go. And then I got on my call and I got on my call and I said to everyone on the call, I was like, hold on a second. I have to do something really quick. And I texted my assistant and I was like, FYI, I just had to send this message to Glennon's team, like keep an eye out. But I was like, there's no way that's going to happen tonight, maybe in a couple of weeks. I'm sure they're just collecting data. So we were halfway through the call that night and I was at my mom's on my tiny Mac Air laptop. So I couldn't even see all the things that were happening on the screen. And all of a sudden in the chat, people are like, is that Glennon Doyle? Is that Glennon Doyle?
Oh,
and I couldn't even see. Cool. She was like one screen over. I didn't even have everyone on my screen. So I couldn't even see her. And I was like, where? What's going on?
That is so fun.
It was, and she was exactly who you want her to be. I'm sure you've had experiences where you meet people and you're like, kind of thought they would be cooler, or like, I've met some duds, I'll be honest. Like you meet people who are really amazing online and then you're like, no, you're not that amazing.
For me, what's most disappointing is when people online seem very personable and you meet them in real life.
Yes.
And they don't engage or like act kind of too good. So that's been my experience. So I'm thrilled. First of all, I think it's so cool she did this. I'm like, I think I saw it on your Instagram and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so jealous.
It was amazing. And then she stayed for like 20 minutes. She was super generous with her time. Like she was just like everything you'd want her. I kind of was like, she'll stay for like 5 minutes. Like I'm sure she has other things to do. It was really great. And it's so fun when you meet people who you really admire and they are as authentic as you want them to be, because then you're like, oh, okay. Like it can be done that way, you know? Because I've had so many opposite experiences where, like you meet people who seem so genuine and raw online, and then you meet them and you're like, you are not even warm and friendly at all.
Yeah, it is. It's disappointing. Well, that sounds like such a magical experience. I have one last question for you. I ask every guest who comes on Free Mama Radio the same question. So the mission of my business of the Free Mama is to make sure that no mother has to choose between family and financial stability. So knowing that, and knowing that most of the women in my community are coming in to try to create their own virtual business so that they can have the time freedom that we both live our lives by, that value. Is there anything you haven't gotten to share today that would be like one final piece of advice that you would want to share with our listeners?
I think with those specific goals in mind, I go back to one of the things I said in the middle is being aware of your most finite resources being your time and energy. And so if you start to build something that compromises your time and energy, be really aware of where you're going to be taking that from. And I think that I've definitely been guilty of this, like not recognizing as I'm building something that if I choose to put energy into this thing that's not my zone of genius or not in my skill set, I'm taking that away from my family. And is that worth it? And sometimes it might be for a short time, but a lot of times it's not. And so being really conscientious about like what you say yes to, what you say no to, so that you aren't taking those precious finite resources from the people and from yourself, like your family, yourself, and the people that really deserve them the most.
I love that. Sara, thank you so much for your time and energy today. I do not take it lightly. It's been so much fun to reconnect with you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun.
Yay. All right, guys, we'll see you next week.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Free Mama Radio. Don't forget to check out Free Mama TV right here on YouTube for hundreds of how-to videos and interviews to help you start, grow, and scale a virtual business from home. If you want to join a community of tens of thousands of moms just like you, make sure you join the Free Mama Movement group over on Facebook. And lastly, if you want to learn more about how we can do this together, work to achieve your goals, and make you our next success story, check out my free training at thefreemamamovement.com. I'll see you next time.